All right, welcome to this explainer. Today, we are going to unpack a truly pivotal moment in military history, the 1962 Sino-Indian War. But we're not just going to look at tactical movements on a battlefield. Actually, we're stepping back to look at this event as a profound masterclass in the higher direction of war, strategic command, and quite frankly, institutional failure. We're drawing directly from some incredibly detailed historical analysis to understand exactly how decisions made far, far away from the front lines dictate the grim reality on the ground. So, let's kick things off with a pretty powerful definition straight from our source material. It states, war is a national undertaking, encompassing all elements of national power. Military strategy derives the impulse from the national goals. Okay, so what does that actually mean? It means war is ultimately driven by policy. And that raises our central question for today's explainer. Why does command responsibility and the way those national goals are translated matter just as much as battlefield courage? To answer that, here is our roadmap for today. We'll cover 1. The higher direction of war. 2. The forward policy flaws. 3. Nam Kha-Chu and unjustifiable risks. 4. NAFA and the geographic dilemma. 5. Failures in higher command. And finally, 6. Strategic leadership and lessons. Let's jump right into Section 1, Higher Direction of War. We're looking at how to convert national objectives into actual operational execution. Throughout this explainer, we are going to run every single failure through this specific 5-step analytical lens. It goes like this. First, what was the decision requirement? Second, what was the available information? Third, what was the actual command choice? Fourth, what was the operational effect on the ground? And fifth, what is the strategic lesson? Every major event we discuss today breaks down perfectly through this exact model.
Think of it like a giant strategic equation. Correct aim plus professional advice plus resources plus execution equals an effective strategy. The absolute crucial point here is that if any single variable is missing, like if you don't have the resources, or if honest professional military advice is just suppressed, the entire strategy completely collapses. It literally falls apart. Let's see how that played out in reality.
Moving on to Section 2, the forward policy flaws. How do you implement a really difficult political directive? There is a massive disconnect here between the civil government's mandate and the fundamental requirements of the military. The political objective was straightforward: assert border presence via the forward policy. But the military requirement to actually achieve that safely? They needed to establish a sustainable defensive system with strong bases first. The source analysis notes that the military leadership at the time, instead of correctly advising the government against a flawed rollout, kind of just went along with it. Because that vital need for strong bases was ignored, we see this devastating domino effect. The army set up isolated posts. That naturally led to weak logistics. And because they were so scattered, there was absolutely no mutual support. The operational effect? Defeat in detail. Basically, the enemy could easily pick off these weak, unsupported outposts one by one. The source makes it crystal clear. Even if a policy is tough, the military has to implement it by establishing strong bases first, rather than leaving troops totally exposed. Which brings us to Section 3, Nam Kha-Chu. We're looking at unjustifiable risks and the fateful decision to evict Chinese positions. Let's apply our analytical lens again. The mission given by the political leadership was an explicit order to evict the Chinese. Now, our sources point out this was essentially an act of war, something that should have involved the highest levels of cabinet deliberation. But then, look at the resources available to the 7th Infantry Brigade at Nam Kha-Chu. No supporting fire, no mines, no barbed wire. The commander on the ground saw the massive enemy buildup and realized the mission was literally impossible, but the higher command structure just forced the issue anyway. 50. Just let that number sink in for a second. 50. According to the source analysis, the troops in the brigade had a mere 50 rounds of ammunition per man. 50 rounds to fight a defensive battle against a massive, highly prepared enemy buildup. The leadership absolutely knew the brigade didn't have the resources to fight for more than an hour, yet they did nothing to relocate them to a safer ridge.
Let's pivot to Section 4, NAFA, the geographic dilemma and the agonizing decision of where to actually hold the line.
Over in the Northeast Frontier Agency, or NEFA, commanders were frantically weighing their terrain options. To Wang, it was just too close to the enemy and way too easily bypassed. Bomdila offered more prep time and better logistics because it stretched the enemy's supply lines. But ultimately they settled on Selah. It offered a dominating position, it was excellent for mutually supporting localities, and it gave them adequate time to build a reasonable defense. It was kind of the Goldilocks zone on paper.
But here is the real tragedy. Sayla was a perfectly viable, excellent defensive position. It absolutely could have been held. The collapse here wasn't just because of the enemy. It was driven by sheer command uncertainty and pessimism. The source highlights that leaders were giving vague, contradictory orders, including premature withdrawal orders that were later canceled. The troops were never even given a fair chance to fight. And this is in stark contrast to later battles in the Western Theater, like Chushul and Razongla, where clear command direction and cohesion led to legendary, historic defensive stands.
This naturally leads us to Section 5, Failures in Higher Command. We're looking at the total breakdown of institutional systems. Have you ever heard of map-based decision-making? The source points out that Eastern Command was located in Lucknow, which is miles and miles away, totally removed from the theater of operations. The leadership was directing troops to occupy tactical positions like the Songli position purely by looking at a map. They didn't verify the ground realities, which actually offered no positive advantage and just denuded other vital defensive positions. The whole institutional system just short-circuited. You had distant headquarters completely removed from reality. Crucially, the higher command replaced competent commanders just because they dared to question impossible orders. The system prioritized yes-men and institutional compliance over actual professional competence. They suppressed honest military advice and exhibited a complete lack of moral courage to say no to militarily unsound directions. Finally, we reach Section 6, Strategic Leadership and Lessons. Let's make these concepts permanent. So, we return to that big central question we posed at the very start. Why does command responsibility matter as much as battlefield courage? Well, because as the analysis shows us, without capable, realistic, and honest higher command, the immense bravery of your frontline troops is just wasted. They are set up to fail before the first shot is even fired. You really have to look at the crucial distinction between these two types of courage. The soldiers on the ground, they possess tremendous physical courage, facing enemy fire and impossible tactical odds. But the higher military leadership catastrophically lacked professional moral courage. They failed to speak uncomfortable truths, they wouldn't risk their careers to advise the political leadership correctly, and they essentially surrendered their command responsibilities. Let's do a rapid-fire revision of the entire failure chain. Step 1. Ignore ground reality. Step 2. Silence your dissenting, experienced officers. Step 3. Issue massive, unresourced orders. Step 4. When reality hits, experience command paralysis. And Step 5. Total institutional collapse. Bad methodology always catches up with you and leads to operational disaster. So, what are the ultimate strategic lessons you should take away from all this? First, unity of command is non-negotiable. You have to ensure an absolute balance between the mission and the resources provided. Professional military advice absolutely must highlight risks honestly. Commanders have to adapt their plans when the ground reality changes. You can't just rely on a map. And lastly, political, military, and diplomatic power must be fully integrated.
I'm going to leave you with this final vital thought. Strategy is not just the orders you give. It is the courage to ensure those orders are grounded in reality. When you look at modern conflicts, or honestly even leadership dynamics within large organizations today, ask yourself, are the decision-makers relying on maps, or are they facing reality? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking the tough questions, and I'll catch you next time.